We're going to be hearing from Michael Figge of Possible Productions and Wyatt Bartel of Lux Machina. They are going to be presenting on League of Legends World 2020 in XR. I'm sure everyone's very excited to hear about this project. It's really incredible technology. So let's bring in Wyatt and Michael. Hey, guys.
Hey, guys.
Hey there.
Hey.
How's it going?
Great to have you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much. Yeah, great to be here.
All right,
Figge,
so not too many.
Are you actually in a studio, or is that your background? Your green.
This is a really good Zoom background. This is like the best Zoom. I could actually reach back here, and so yeah.
This is all LED. I'm telling you.
This is all XR.
Yeah,
that's what
my
this
whole
presentation
home is LED actually.
No, I'm actually in a studio, even though no one else is here right now, just because of the situation worldwide. But still a good place to come to work. So, broadcasting for Possible.
Well, it's good to see you guys. Take it away.
All right.
Sure. Should be up.
Cool. Awesome. So we'll start off with some introductions real fast. Laura did great. I'm Wyatt Bartel. I'm a partner. I'm a senior technical director at Lux Machina. And for the Worlds project, I was the virtual production producer out there.
And I'm Michael Figge. I'm a co-founder and creative director at Possible. On this project, I was the creative producer for Worlds XR. If you guys are interested in following updates, I'll have the slide at the end too, but basically our social handles are Possible Productions, LuxMC with an underscore, and Riot Games. So this show is Worlds. It's the biggest show you've never heard of. This is a huge, huge show that has been happening. It's the biggest show in eSports. It is the most watched sport in China from ages 18 to 35. So there's a huge audience out there, much bigger than the Super Bowl, but you've probably never heard of it. And so one of the things is we want to acquaint you with what we've done in years past and what we set out to do this year. So in 2016, this is the show that we did at Staples Center, sense of scale. This footprint of the projection cube is the size of the basketball court where the Lakers play on, and then the net goes all the way up to the scoreboard. So it's a very big projection mappable surface, and then we also did volumetric projection mapping in it, as well as an interior cube that was projection mapped as well. To kick it up the next year, we did this little stunt, which is probably some of you may be familiar with, but this is the Elder Dragon flying into Bird's Nest in Beijing. It's a short and sweet clip done in zero density. The dragon comes in and it lands, and it's an augmented reality dragon from the game bursting onto the stage. The year after that, we decided to one up ourselves and go with 4 characters in the game, forming a pop group called KDA. And this time we did it with Pixotope. So you see the reflections on the stage. We're doing it with the Steadicam fly through. So the bar is pretty high for the iconic type of stuff that we like to do. The challenge with AR, of course, is that no one in the room can see it. So last year in Paris, we rolled out the largest HoloNet ever to do a really big hologram show, so the audience in the stadium and the audience at home could see it. So with all of that, we're starting to attract the attention of great partners. The chest was a project that we also did with Louis Vuitton. Tell you a little bit about partnership. Basically, Possible is the creative agency of record for Riot Games eSports, and we help them to push the boundaries. And so when it came to 2020, we wanted to look at what's the most interesting way to bring these stages to life in a way no one's ever seen before. And that brings us to Worlds XR 2020, the most advanced mixed reality show ever. Done an international show in the middle of a pandemic when all forms of existing visas to China were canceled. If we were going to do it in China.
Yeah, a pretty big challenge and a really high bar to try to push upwards once again for this year. You know, we looked at this with some design priorities on the outset that included things like flexibility, you know, making sure that our stage that we were designing and the system we were bringing out there could survive for 2 months and not get stale, whether that was new art or new features coming online as we progressed through the show. We wanted to make sure it was big, so scale was, a factor for sure. How many pixels can we push? How tall of a wall can we build? Things like that. Stability as well, making sure that over those 2 months, when you're on an island in the middle of a pandemic in Shanghai, you don't have a lot of resources at your disposal to try to replace parts. If a machine goes down, you're not going to get a new one quickly, stuff like that. So all of that led us to design an LED volume that was 50 feet by 50 feet by 12 feet. So certainly one of the biggest LED volumes ever built for broadcast and in general, really out there. We decided to try to take in live game data throughout the entirety of the event. So we were receiving OSC commands from Riot's engine in the millions throughout the day, every day. We were taking in GPI triggers from the camera TD, doing live camera switches on the wall. We had 4 tracked cameras going at all times. So, there was really a lot of technology pushing the creative. And then I think Possible really hit it out of the park as well with the art assets, blending the creative elements of the show that we were trying to incorporate as a brand with the technology and the infrastructure that we brought out there.
Yeah, these shows aren't made in a vacuum. These shows lay into a larger campaign. So that's one of the things we want to talk about today. It's not just XR for the sake of XR, but how can you layer it into the overall strategy that a show might have as part of a larger company? So this show, as an expression of a larger campaign, really keyed off of this season's biggest changes, which is around the dragons. The dragons are each based off the 4 elements. But instead of aligning with something that would be considered high fantasy, something that would be towards a niche audience, we took the approach with the Riot creative team to convert the elements into something that was a little more contemporary and textural. So if you see here, for instance, this is the earth, cloud, water, and fire textures. The cloud textures, just recall that these shapes are very custom. They'll come into play later when we show you some of the designs of the stages. This was really key too in terms of color palette, keeping it narrow. It's based off of the Shanghai color palette at night. And layering in some Barbara Kruger style typography. You'll see this type of typography throughout Supreme and other streetwear brands. All of this would have to be realized by our team across a number of different surfaces, not just the stage. When it goes into the hallways, for instance, every square foot of the venue is made so that you can shoot in it. So there's one side and then there's the other side for the other teams. All of this layers into key art, which was put together by Riot's team. And this key art was part of a larger blanket campaign of artwork where you can see bold colors, bold typography. And the trick here is, like, sometimes you don't actually know if this is a sporting event or a video game. That was really key. And when you're looking at something like this, one of the things from a design standpoint is you got to ask, how do we translate this to light and shape? And the solution that we've been deploying, because this is pretty on trend right now, is something that's familiar with a lot of people probably on this call, which is work that we did on the VMAs 2019, inspired by James Turrell light fixtures. So if you look at the sculptural installations of James Turrell, you can see that he's using large swaths of light for indirect illumination across and creating gradients. And so if you could imagine this, and this is actually, those were references from James Turrell. This is our work from the VMAs last year, where we had augmented reality pieces and venue replacement. We really wanted to take this type of monochromatic or low color palette, limited color palette setting and include typography with it. And prior to the pandemic, we've been working with our partners at LuxMC to come up with new technology and push it in a way that hasn't been pushed before. And they had been doing really cool stuff across projects that are famous now, like The Mandalorian. So we reached out to them to see if they had an XR solution we can tap into.
Yeah, Figge, I think you can see from the breadth of the campaign that you guys had to put together, on our end, we had to put something very similar together in terms of depth from a technology standpoint. So, The Mandalorian is a great body of work to pull from for us to pull from for technology and workflows. And we had to start spinning this up really quickly with our friends over at Possible to make sure that our pipelines were flowing almost immediately from the green light to actually deploying things on stage. And we'll get to this a little bit later, but as a proof of concept to make sure everybody's comfortable. So, one of the most important things is making sure that you and your partners are all speaking the same language. And so, as we go along, we created quite a few educational pieces, whether they're proof of concepts to help people understand what we're talking about from a technology point of view. You can see here what a camera frustum is shown in red and how that might apply to the LED. And then also making sure that we're designing the right type of stage and size. And, do we have enough? Is it tall enough? Does it cover the, the angles we need? And then helping to make sure that the creatives understand that, what may look really strange to your eye when you're on site shouldn't scare you, because to the camera, as you can see on the right of this GIF, it's, going to be extended into a really amazing world around it. And so as we come to, from the brand side, looking at all the variations of type, and we look at all the different technologies that we need to blend together, the dependencies that we have really start stacking up for one another to make sure that our creatives are signing off on a language that we can start running with effectively, that our technology is locked in, our code is locked at some point, so we have features that we can depend on that aren't going to break, 2 weeks down the line when somebody updates something and all of a sudden that feature we thought we were going to have no longer works, which is, living on the bleeding edge, something that we really try to make sure we're cognizant of going into these massive shows. And then, getting the pre-production teams ready, doing these drawings and making sure that when you deploy your 20 render engine kit to Shanghai, that you didn't leave the nuts and bolts back in Los Angeles, because once you get out there, there's really no going back. So there's a lot of validation both on the hardware side that you need to do and the software side. So, as I mentioned, we had 20 render engines. Those were brand new out of the box. We had new KVM systems. We had new blueprints that we were making for this show specifically. We had new features that were in alpha, in quasi-functional states coming from, the pre-released version of 4.2.6 we were operating on for this show. So there was a lot of validation we needed to do. So in the end, we decided to build a quarter scale volume out of the Koima to make sure that everything we had planned was actually going to work before we got on the plane to go out there. And obviously, not all productions have this luxury to do. So we feel very fortunate about this. But as you can see on the left there, this GIF is the physical LED volume that we built for that. And then the right is the set extension AR work. So we had all of our system out there just with less LED basically to make sure that the blinking lights were talking to the correct blinking lights, everywhere they were trying to get to. And I think without this, it would have been a really big challenge, especially in a pandemic like this when you're so isolated out in China.
Yep, and looking at all of these solutions that Lux was able to put together, we had to look at some outside of the box solutions when it came to content approaches, because all the content was built in Unreal 4.26 over the course of about 3 or 4 months, and it's very it's kind of straightforward in most applications where we can take a model and do a PBR material onto the UVs. But a lot of this show is so effects heavy that we had to employ a lot of video game trickery to make it work at 32K resolution at 60 frames per second, all in real time and reliably. So it's not just PBR materials. We were also doing UV manipulation and flip booking and a lot of other things that would really push this to try to get these materials that were designed originally in offline renders. But as we got deeper into the project, we began to develop all of these effects natively in Unreal. So what you see here is an example of us taking stabs at scale studies and particle studies, but using Unreal for look dev. All of these particles are done in Niagara. And then we're also doing tests with seeing if post-process volumes, which basically control the world globally, do we need to darken down the world to make certain things pop? And then how do we control that logic and feed it up in a way that plays nicely across the volume? So this is another example where we were testing slower particles. And then we were also taking OSC signals. Whenever a player died, they had pillars behind them. So you can see on stage their pillar would die, but we would not cue that, that would auto cue. And then there was a lot of little art direction things that need to be considered. For instance, each of the characters had a different color palette that it corresponds to. So we need to come up with a procedural system to influence the color of these particles. One other aspect of it is that we also had to figure out the precise layout of the player cams. The player cams are what you see on the heads-up display while the game is playing. And normally this isn't a very considered frame, but we really wanted to make sure that the information we were animating on the back of the volume pertained specifically to the player that was behind it or in front of it. And then when it came to the actual art direction, we made a ton of stuff. So these are frames from various iterations and explorations that our team built out. There's a very large team here at Possible working across all sorts of artwork for this. I will say that none of these frames actually got used in the final, not because the client didn't like them, but because we did not feel it was cohesive enough yet. So the amount of iteration required to actually hit something that's cohesive for a month-long show is enormous. And then we would also take things like the key art, which I showed you earlier, and we would basically reverse engineer it. So this is a 2D painted asset. It's just a Photoshop painter, but we actually would model it out in a highly optimized game asset and then bake in the lighting so it looks like it's the same thing that you're seeing in the game, but it is actually really low poly model. And we're just using shaders to get more detail out of it. And then as a for instance, when we dove into the content creation, this was our first idea for the Earth stage. And it's definitely like a sufficient design, like it's very beautiful, but the trick is figuring out how it doesn't look cool just for the sake of looking cool, but how does it feed into the overall campaign? And if you can remember all of that campaign artwork that we had, although the stonework relates to the Earth element, it doesn't really relate to the campaign. So we went through an enormous amount of iteration. This was just the iteration as it related to only that stage. And then we had 4 different stages that need to be designed, and some of them had day and nighttime lighting scenarios. We would go through a lot of map painting iterations to get far away detail. And ultimately, we moved the entire pipeline to look deving and optimizing in Unreal. So here you see some early fly-throughs, just trying to figure out how you would do something like clouds when we all know volumes are an expensive thing. So what's a really clever way to do that? Those curly cloud shapes that I showed you at the beginning that related to the campaign, we actually hand-painted a custom HDRI with those curly clouds in them so that whenever we were looking around, you could see the campaign, but it was a different interpretation of the campaign. We made a lot of video fly-throughs in Unreal just to give people a sense of what the world would look like, what the scale was, when people could get dizzy if you were moving too fast, and what types of camera moves worked best. So ultimately, these are some of the frames that we were landing on for the cloud stage. And folks would check us sometimes to just make sure, like, this is a really great frame, but what is it going to look like in Unreal? Because, you know, if you design it in Maya or Cinema 4D or something like that, it's going to turn out different when you design it in Unreal. And it felt really good to say, like, hey, you are actually looking at it out of Unreal right now. We're doing the final phase of look dev in real-time rendering. And we had to figure out other things like on the water stage, how to do caustics without actually doing caustics. And then working with the lighting design department to be able to make sure that those caustics were practically implemented onto the stage, onto the players. And then this carried through to the fire stage as well. And aside from making the stages look nice, they also had to be functional. So we had tools that Lux Machina had to step in and help to build out and make sure that they were show controllable.
Figge, you go forward a slide there for me.
Sure.
Yeah, there you go. So our whole show really relied on the concept of flexibility and bringing in outside elements into the engine to extend the artwork that we had on the day. So not only did we have a big IMAX screen up there that was taking in replays of the game that had just been happening. We're also making sure that that's flexible enough to be on a queue that the director can give us, that we can click a button, bring it in, fly it out. Same way, extending the brand and the property into the stage by bringing it to life with that game data was really important for us to make sure that the technology was also pushing the same concepts that we were, trying to extend it with the larger campaign for the property as well. And, we had everything on manual controls as well. So if for some reason we did miss a player death or a power up for, whether it's a bug or a dropped packet in the network, something like that, we had a custom UI interface for our operators on site that was running on a touch screen, just a regular Dell, that said, right, player 1 died, player 1 revived, bring in the IMAX screen. Hey, we want to go to camera 4, something like that on the LED wall. So, I think the cohesion and the concept from both an artistic standpoint and a technological standpoint really flowed to create a months-long campaign that culminated in a great success.
And aside from the gameplay, at the start of every leg of the tournament, what we wanted to do was do an opening ceremony show. This would be a 2-minute show, which would lead straight into the game, but it would set the tempo or it would set the theme for what the stage was going to be. So this is a slide from design work we were doing on the fire stage, heavily influenced by Sunshine, the movie, Danny Glover movie. But we were doing shoots in between the tournament to be able to make sure that we could line everything up and that the frustums were working properly. There's a huge choreographic element that had to work out. So what you're seeing here isn't green screen. This is shot live on the XR stage. The way that these 2-minute opening ceremonies work was they were heavily storyboard, which is what you see on the left. They went into look dev, and we worked hand in hand with the choreography team, which is Mike Song and Addie Chan. And they worked with a local partner in Shanghai who was able to provide a rehearsal and iterate in concert with us while we were in quarantine, which was another logistical trick. We did first of our kind levels of projection tricks onto the LED, where it looked like you were going through hallways. Here's an example. There's going to be some music that might play loud for a second, so just watch your speakers. So what you're seeing on the left here, I think, Wyatt, you might want to describe this one.
Yeah, sure. There's we've got our Steadicam operator being tracked with the Stipe system. And then we've got our in-camera view frustum, tracking along with it, doing a forced perspective trick onto the LED wall. I gotta say, I feel like I've done a lot of XR, and I feel very fortunate in that respect at large scale. I don't think I've ever seen or felt so amazed at technology that I had deployed as I did at this moment. Seeing somebody run through what feels like a 6 foot wide or a 4 foot wide corridor with foreground layers masking the actress as she runs along, sort of just on the fly, and then looking up with your eye and seeing that actress, in a 50 foot wide, totally open space, and really understanding how flexible and amazing this technology can be when it's applied. It's one of those really magical moments for me that I don't think I'll ever forget, and I'm really thankful that we had the opportunity to make happen. And here, some more side-by-sides of our show. You can see here our champion selection data coming in. So our player selects a champion. That was a manual call. Sometimes the director wants an effect to happen, sometimes it doesn't. So we need to make sure that we protect for that flexibility on site. We've got our set extension happening up top, as well as our ArtNet controlled lighting fixtures. So we had 100 lights we were pushing GMX and pixel samples from the world to really drive that stuff. We've got our camera switching here happening also. So it doesn't show in the GIF because they're side by sides, but each one of these cameras was called through a GPI trigger from a remote facility across a network, as our TD was not in the same building with us. So, that was translated into OSC through some logic that we created, and gave them as traditional a camera operating experience as we could. And then I think Figge, the next one might go upwards. We also had OSC data coming in for player logos. So right at the top there, you might see the GD from that particular team's logo up in the world, populating and again extending that blend of the real world, the properties, the brands of everybody, and making sure those meld together. And at the end of each one of these matches, we never stopped down, so our stage never turned off for 10 hours a day. And so we also had the flexibility to reset this entire stage back to a neutral position for our next teams to come in and push us forward.
And it's really quite a feat that we were able to do with Lux Machina. I think that they're very clever in figuring out a way that we had four. It's a little tricky to see it here, but this is what it looked like on stage when we saw all four camera clusters up at the same time. Each camera was calling up the image that it wanted to look at. And yeah, so aside from that, it wasn't just possible in Lux Machina. There's a huge team, enormous support from Wyatt, the Kinjas, the lighting designer Matt Stovall. There were so many people involved in making this happen, and we're really thankful that we made it through the other side in this crazy hard year to do something like this. So once again, if you're interested in seeing what we're going to do next, our socials are at Possible Productions, at LuxMC_, and at Riot Games. Thank you very much, and we're looking forward to showing you more next time.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Fantastic, guys. Really great presentation.
Thank you.
That was really wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And Figge puts together a mean deck.
That's why he makes the big bucks. Keeps us all busy, we hope. We have one attendee question and probably time for a couple more if you guys want to get them in real quick. From Chet, he wants to know about your interaction with Riot and the technology. Has Riot built OSC hooks into League of Legends for you, primarily for you to do all of this sort of thing that you're describing as part of their gold release or custom branches for Worlds?
Riot was a great partner in that conversation. Being a professional esports company in some ways, they've got a lot of tools that are custom for the operation of the events themselves. So it's not necessarily built into what you might download, and play on a user experience level. But there are custom tools, whether that's a director's tool set for replays of cool moments in the game that just happened. So we were extending with them on in that type of application that lives outside of their main game but still has that same crosstalk. So we're not necessarily extending the main release, but we are extending their their side platform. And we developed a scope with them and basically said, what data do we have access to? We created a framework and saying OSC commands for what happens when you trigger a Baron, or what's the game clock, syntax going to be, stuff like that. And then as well as defining how many machines does it need to go to, are we broadcasting, or are we unicasting, are we UDP, are we TCP? So they were really great in helping us really fit all of our needs for that.
Fantastic.
Laura, do we have time for another question?
Bring it on.
Figge, you talked about the clouds and the complexity of the clouds relative to the other more linear content, and you referenced HDRI. Can you explain that a little further?
Yeah, sure. There's a layer of information visually in every world that's like infinitely far away, and for most people, it's the sky. And an HDRI is a high dynamic range image that you can map to a sky. And sometimes it's used for illumination, so that's how you get really realistic renders. And other times it's just a faraway texture that has very little parallax, so it feels further away. So basically, in your scene, you want a giant sphere, and you want to be able to map a texture to that sphere. We just gave some consideration to the art direction instead of just throwing a stock cloud texture up there, a stock cloud HDRI. Let's art direct the clouds that we put up there to match the clouds that we have in the foreground.
Got it. Thank you. And presumably that's a lighter duty render than having 3D clouds out there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You just treat it like a matte painting. It's very inexpensive. Yep.
Beautiful.
Yeah, we did a lot of work on optimization on all of these scenes to make sure that 4K 60 on every machine and 32K total at 60 is a big task. So we were looking for every bit of performance gain we could get.
Yeah, that does not go unnoticed how easily you let terms like 32K, 60 frames per second just roll off your tongue. Whereas I think that would have put fear in the fear of God in all of us, like, 6 months prior. This is incredible work, and you guys make it look seamless. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I think you guys are going to spend a little time with us in our Hop-In social hour. So if the attendees find these guys over in our social sessions area, you can ask more questions and get more details on Worlds. Thank you guys for being here. Really enjoyed having you.
That was very nice
Thanks for the
presentation.
invite.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.